All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. We are excited to have you join us. We are diving into a topic that can truly make the difference for your business: effective pricing strategies. Honestly, we've been looking forward to this session for a while. We've been talking about it for a while, and so we're thrilled to finally share it with you. I'm Jacqueline Martinez, and this is Pricing Strategies, where you're leaving money on the table. Now, before we dive in, I want to announce to our audience that we have officially launched our podcast, Above the Clouds: Stories from the Boardroom. Every episode, we soar into the world of B2B markets, navigating their complex skies by talking to industry leaders. We explore the flight paths they chart, the obstacles they dodge, and the trending winds lifting businesses to new heights. Stay tuned as we uncover strategies, challenges, and triumphs shaping today's business landscape. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and anywhere you might find your podcasts. So today we are talking about why is pricing so important. Well, it's not just about numbers. It's a powerful tool that can shape your market position, influence customer decisions, and have a huge impact on your bottom line. Today, our goal is simple. We want to give you practical tips and fresh perspective on how to approach pricing strategy in a way that works for your specific business goals. And here's the best part. We've got a special guest for you today who's going to shed some light on pricing strategies specifically for the oil and gas industry with insights that you won't get anywhere else. This is your time, so don't hold back. Feel free to ask questions, share your thoughts, and jump into the conversation in the chat. I will be monitoring them throughout the entire conversation, and we will be answering your questions at the end of this panel. All right. Now, we're thrilled to introduce our incredible speakers today, each of them bringing a wealth of experience and deep industry knowledge to the table. Leading the conversation today is Shannon Carlson, a seasoned CMO with 15 years of experience helping organizations optimize profitability. Joining her is David Batt, president of Kimberlite Oilfield Research, who will share exclusive insights about the role of price and value based on the voice of customer. And last but not least, Richard Bird, the head of the Nest at Bluebird Strategic Sales and Marketing. Together, they'll equip you with the tools and strategies that you need to tackle your pricing challenges head on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel.
Great to be here with you.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Thanks for a great intro.
Yeah, you're welcome. Now, understanding pricing is crucial for any business looking to maximize their revenue and stay competitive. Many companies unintentionally leave money on the table by not leveraging the right pricing strategies or fully understanding their pricing power. Today, we're diving into those key topics like the importance of pricing, common pitfalls, pricing models, and how companies lose their pricing edge. So today, first, we're going to talk to Shannon. Why do you think so many businesses struggle to get pricing right, and what steps can they take to improve?
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for having me, Jackie. And I'm really excited to talk about pricing today because I do think it's honestly one of the most powerful levers a company has. And oftentimes it can just be really misunderstood or overlooked. So I'll talk a little bit about my experience today with clients and what I've seen because we do see this all the time. Companies with great products, solid operations, and really strong teams, but oftentimes they leave money on the table because pricing is more treated like a checkbox instead of a strategy. And so sometimes it can be, fear of losing customers or legacy pricing models that were, set a really long time ago and just not, revisited. And sometimes it's just that no one feels truly that's owning pricing internally or just a misalignment, right? And we'll talk a little bit about the different, people within the organization and how they see it and why that can be so different sometimes, right? But the good news is that, pricing doesn't have to be overly complicated. It just requires attention, data, and just sometimes thinking a little bit differently about it. So we'll kind of break down, those things a little bit too. And the other thing I'll add is, pricing is the fastest way to impact profit. A small change in price, like just 1%, can have a bigger impact on the bottom line than increasing volume or cutting costs and things like that. So what you see here on on the slide is cost plus pricing, and it's pretty straightforward, right? It's very, you have the cost of the product and then you add a markup to that cost. It's simple, but it doesn't reflect what the market's willing to pay. And so the default oftentimes is to cost plus pricing because it feels safe. But it doesn't often account for customer value, market demand, things like that. And usually there's internal pressure to keep prices low, things like that. So, and so sometimes those decisions are isolated. And so cost plus pricing oftentimes can leave a lot of money on the table. So if we want to look at what are the other types of pricing models that you might see at other businesses. So we just talked about cost plus, and there's also value-based pricing, right? Value-based is where you are adding on what the perceived value is of that product. So price based on the outcome or impact that you might deliver to the customer. And this one can take work, but it's where you see the most, where you will see the most lift in revenue and in margin specifically. So that is, really important from a value-based perspective, to really have that perceived value. Because oftentimes, if you are not looking at it this way, then you can be leaving a lot of money on the table. So there is kind of some different ways to look at that. Pricing decisions can be isolated, sometimes made by finance or sales or without that cross-functional input or clear rationale. And so we've seen, our clients be able to really get the most value by looking at it from a value-based perspective. So this is a really interesting diagram on, what this can look like within an organization. And so cost-based pricing is often driven by finance, right? They definitely want to make sure that they're not just that they're more than covering the cost for the product, that they're getting that significant margin that's on top of the product. So oftentimes, finance is making sure that the business is covered, and well above what you're paying for the cost of the product. So that's often there, and you've got that markup there. So it's a pretty simple model. Then you have the market-based pricing, which is oftentimes driven by sales. It's oftentimes based on your competitors, and excuse me, based on competitors. And it's good for staying in the ballpark, but it can be dangerous if your product is more valuable or differentiated to the market, because and salespeople, they're working hard, they're hustling, they're making all those calls, and they're trying to make sales. But sometimes, we can really lose out on additional additional value from those, and from a pricing perspective, because we're more worried about, getting that sale in the door versus what does this actually, what is someone actually willing to pay for versus what we're willing to sell it for, right? And so that value can be lost there. Now, value-based pricing is, based on the outcome or impact that you deliver to the customer. And this is where you really will see the most lift in revenue and in margin, because here you're actually, doing what the customer is willing to pay for the product itself, right? Or for the service. So oftentimes this is where it can be really powerful to have an internal strategy where you are working with the marketing team to understand, how is your product or service differentiated? What are those value propositions? How are you positioning that to your market? How are you showing it to your customers or to prospects? And then also understanding from the competitor side, like, how are they selling? How are they differentiating, so that how to overcome some of those objections? How do you kind of position that against competitors? So it is really important to understand those things. And pricing, shapes the perception. Price tells your customer how to value your product or service. So if you undervalue that, they will think, that product or service may not be worth it. And so it can really be a strategic growth lever. And smart pricing, it can open up new customer segments, improve margins, support long-term scalability. So if you're not thinking about it as a strategic decision, then you're likely missing opportunities to grow your both your revenue and your brand equity as a whole. So really understanding that. And I would say another thing is how customers can often lose pricing power. And I've seen this time and time again. Like frequent discounting. It trains customers to wait for deals or undermine the perceived value. And you have to be really careful with that. I had a client one time who said, well, we'll just give them, the first 6 months free. And then what happens after that? Well, then you're telling them that for that 6 months, that product or service is not as valuable as it will be afterwards. So you have to be really careful on the try before you buy type of method sometimes, just because of that perception within the customer. And you also can lose pricing powers, like I mentioned, with the lack of differentiation, the inconsistent value messaging across the teams that we're talking about now, and then also not delivering on what you say you're going to, right? If your customer doesn't, if your customer experience doesn't match what you're, charging for, then they'll push back on that or leave. So really thinking about pricing strategically, it is critical to not leaving money on the table. And so it's really important to understand these major pricing strategies and how they can impact your long-term revenue within your organization and your growth as a whole.
Mhm. I see that, the conversation of tariffs have really put strain on that pricing conversation. Do you have any insights to what we can say or how we can direct that conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is, a very hot topic right now, I would say, within, some of the clients that we're working with, and really trying to leverage this opportunity to lead the conversation around these. And that is what's important, is to determine whether or not you have a voice with the conversation that's going on right now around tariffs, right? And they are, they can directly impact your cost structure, especially if you import materials or products from specific countries. And I guess one of the key questions to ask is, do we absorb that cost or do we pass it on? And I think there's not necessarily a one size fits all answer. It just requires a lot of strategic thinking and clear communication. And I think just alignment internally on what that looks like. You have to look at what the perception is for that. What does it look like for your customers? I would say that transparency is always really important. And having that conversation with them to know what that's going to be like. And I think waiting to have that conversation with your customers, if you know it's going to directly impact them, can be kind of detrimental. So getting in front of those conversations, but also sometimes tariffs can become a convenient or legitimate reason to adjust prices. But again, what matters is how transparent and proactive you manage that conversation with your customers.
Mm-hmm. Open communication is always key. Thank you, Shannon, for giving us a solid lay of the land and helping us understand the factors that contribute to those pricing issues. Now, let's take a look at the information that David has to share with us today. There are shifts taking place in the market, but with proper pricing strategies, you'll be able to navigate through rough water. David, what are you seeing today?
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Shannon. Just to kind of build on what Shannon talked about the value that you bring versus in pricing strategies is kind of important. What I'll be sharing with you today is some information that's based on voice of the customer. And some of the key messages, just to echo what Shannon was talking about, price and value are indeed not the same. And at Kimberlite, what we do each year is we interview through one-on-one phone interviews with 3,000 E&P operators globally. And we invest this 20,000 hours each year to talk to the users of oilfield services around the world. And over the last several years, we've interviewed over 22,000 users of oilfield services and have amassed just under 1 million supplier performance ratings on all the different oilfield service company suppliers to formulate some analytics and build a series of reports across the oil field, ranging drilling, completion, production, formation, evaluation, subsea, and pipeline. And what we learn here is through these interactions is from the customer's perspective, we learn about their needs for and plans for activity and pricing trends, technology adoption. And we're going to focus a lot today on oilfield service company performance and competitive position, because that has an impact on pricing strategies. One of the things that's the biggest misnomer in the oil and gas industry is the oil field services community is all price driven. But when you look at this chart, you find quite the opposite. If I had told you 10, 11 years ago in 2014 that the rig count was going to decline by 75%, but yet production was going to increase by 50%, many people would have questioned that types of observation. And the reason we're able to accomplish more with less is because technology and innovation and consistent service quality is driving the market, not pricing alone. Pricing is a factor, but not the only factor. In fact, when we run statistical correlations based on feedback from the E&P operators as to which oilfield service company suppliers they use and why, and these are statistically calculated buy-in behaviors, what we find is that differentiating technology and performance, followed by consistent service quality, are the clear reasons as to why oilfield service company suppliers are selected internationally and offshore. When you move into North America, you see a more equally segmented market because there's hundreds of E&P operators in North America land. And truly, some of the E&P operators really are just looking for low price and quick availability, whereas there's still another third looking for differentiating performance and technology and innovation, and another third, 37%, looking for consistent service quality. So regardless of the product lines that we do, we research all of the major oilfield service product lines. We'll always ask the E&P operators from their perspective of the suppliers with whom they're using, how would they rate the performance of the suppliers with whom they're using on a range of performance variables, such as responsiveness to needs, equipment quality, reliability, competency of the field service personnel, technical support, availability, in this case, overall mud motor performance and pricing competitiveness. There's no evidence whatsoever that these E&P operators find the supplier's performance to be identical. In fact, they see quite a bit of variance. As we track these every single year, and we've got thousands and thousands of ratings, we can look at industry average trends. We can look at individual oil field service companies trends, Baker Hughes, Halliburton, Schlumberger, NOV, Scientific Drilling, just to name a few. But when you look at this map, and I call it the spaghetti map, there's clearly no evidence whatsoever that all of these suppliers are performing at the same level at all. And quite frankly, when you start to segment this to the eyes of the major oil companies versus to the eyes of a national oil company, or if you start to look at different regions like international land, where you see SOB consistently getting high marks versus North America land, where you find SOB's customer review ratings lagging industry benchmark. And so one of the things that you need to understand as a supplier is that based on your net promoter score, likelihood to be recommended for future use, and your performance review ratings, there's quite a bit of dispersion in the eyes of the end user, the customers, in terms of value and performance delivered. In this value map, which depicts the competitive landscape visually, we plot the supplier performance on the x-axis versus pricing competitiveness on the y-axis. And to Shannon's point, one of the things as a supplier you need to determine is, hey, look, what's my strategy? Am I trying to be in the top right-hand quadrant, premium offering, cost more but worth it, or a discount quadrant, get what you pay for? Or do you wish to be in a value advantage position where you're positioned to grow share, maybe expand margin? If you happen to be viewed in this top left-hand quadrant, it means that your value proposition is being challenged in the eyes of the end users. And you really have at least two options. You can improve performance to the right to get your pricing strategies better aligned with the performance and value that you deliver, or you can adjust your pricing strategies down back into the fair value fairway. One thing to understand is as you move around, I don't care if it's drill bits, but you're going to look different in different regions, be it the Permian Basin versus the Eagle Ford or the Mid-Con. You're also going to maybe see differentiated value, like for wireline logging. When I was a geologist for Chevron, and you see perfectly differentiated value here in the offshore when I worked in the Gulf of Mexico, now called Gulf America. In some cases, I would choose Baker Hughes or Halliburton to wireline log the well. It was a normal pressure, normal temperature well. If I had an exploration well that was high temperature, critical well, I'd probably pay more to get more from Schlumberger. And so even the customers are trying to find fit for purpose, okay? So keep in mind that if you cannot identify the value that you bring and quantify the value that you bring to your customers, then it's really difficult for you to put together a plan to grow that relationship. Every supplier has customers that see great value in them, and they also have customers that are challenging their value proposition, and which is why price and value are not the same. You can charge three customers the same price for the same service. Some customers will see great value in you, others will challenge your value proposition, and yet others will see that your value is properly aligned with the market and for what you deliver. Therefore, a one-size-fits-all pricing strategy may not always be the most appropriate. Why does it matter? If you're competitively positioned in zone one, it's price inelastic. If you're in zone two, it's price elastic. That's why it matters. And so it's really best that you integrate your financial reality with voice of customer data and feedback with your internal perception as to why you're being viewed so successfully, why you have a positive relationship with the customer, and how do you grow those relationships, and why are you having some challenged relationships. And when I meet with the customers themselves, oftentimes I challenge the customers. Are you being a good customer or a bad customer? In some cases, it's hard to reach mutual value if you're not being a collaborative good customer in terms of setting expectations and plans. And so, if you take a look at Halliburton for hydraulic fracturing, they try not to be all things to all people. The E&P operators that value completion efficiency and intensity with 60 plus frac stages, 12,000 foot super long laterals, and large programs view Halliburton far more favorably than the small operators that drill less than 20 wells. The people that drill less than 20 wells find ProFrac to be delivering the best overall value. Okay. And so, in closing, some thoughts here. You need to segment your market, and you need to identify and quantify where you bring the best mutual value for your firm as the supplier and for your customer. And you try not to be all things to all people. Find your sweet spot in the market. Performance, technology, and consistent service quality matters. Price plays a role in the value equation, but it's not the only driver. It's just one critical component. And if I just go back to the dashboard really quick, if I were to take a look at who we want to pick on, we can pick on Schlumberger. If you look at Schlumberger really quick, you can see that Schlumberger looks different in the eyes and the minds of a national oil company versus an independent oil company. They look different by different geographic regions. If you don't understand the value of the net promoter score, promoters, passives, and detractors, your net promoters see great value in your net detractors are challenging your value proposition. And the net promoter score has financial implications. So if I sit inside the shoes of Schlumberger's promoting customers, you can see how biased they are in Schlumberger's favor. And they also tend to give a disproportionate share of spend, 64% of their mud motor business in this example, to Schlumberger. However, if I find that Schlumberger's passive customers see this, they're going, well, why should I pay a higher price to Schlumberger if I can just go down the road at a lower price and walk away with a similar outcome? And all of a sudden, Schlumberger no longer has 65, 66%. They lose 4 or 5% market share of wallet. So the difference between a passive rating on the net promoter score and a promoting rating is larger share with opportunity to grow versus less share with probably margin compression pressure because you're undifferentiated in the eyes of the customer. Lord knows the detractors think everyone's better than Schlumberger, and you can see that their market share drops another 10 percentage points or 12 percentage points. So being able to use data, as Shannon mentioned, in order to identify where you're competitively positioned in the marketplace is far better than just using a one-size-fits-all cost-plus model. If you do that, you're probably misjudging where you should be participating in the market and where you should be avoiding burning resources, where you just really don't bring the best fit to the market. Everyone has the best fit. Don't try to be all things to all people. And that sums it up.
Thank you, David. That was very insightful. So price and value are not the same. Being able to identify and quantify the value you deliver is essential to building the professional value proposition to ensure mutual value is being achieved by both the customer and the supplier. Now, when it comes to navigating market dynamics and adapting to evolving customer expectations, implementing effective pricing strategies is critical for sustained success. And Richard is going to walk us through some of those strategies today.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Shannon, and thanks, David. We work with David, and a lot of our clients purchase David's research, and we always see a ton of value in the work that he and his team do over there. It's just great to have that kind of data. And I wish all of our clients across different industries had that kind of resource to rely on. And frankly, they just don't. They don't have that kind of deep voice of customer insights, that are coming directly from their customers. Sometimes you have to start from scratch. And one of the things I want to talk about today is, what are some useful tools? Whenever I go do a lunch and learn or go to a conference, I always, I'm a tools guy. I like having interesting and fun tools and little things that I can use when I get back to the office. So you can take maybe one of these tools that I'm going to talk about and apply it in your organization. Your boss will think this was time well spent, hopefully. So let's look at this. So we've talked about, price and value are not the same thing. I could not agree more with that. We talked about, different types of pricing models. So if we know this is the case, that, customers or companies are sometimes leaving money on the table, and you saw that in David's bottom right-hand corner, maybe, I don't know. Maybe it is true. Maybe it's not true for that, but it is true for those particular clients because that's the way they see it. And if you segment your market that way, you'll understand it. But where do people lose that pricing power? And what we see is a lot of times, a lot of our clients have grandfathered pricing. So they've worked with the same clients for years and years, and they have been reticent to go up on their pricing compared to their other customers that come in. And with good reason, because we, as marketers, we always say it costs a lot more money to bring in a new customer than it does to retain a customer. But that can also, it's a two-sided coin. It can come back and bite you if you're not watching it. And all of a sudden you go and you look up and you go, wow, this is, we're not making a lot of money on this customer anymore. There's a lot of revenue coming through that customer, but where are our margins? What happened to our margins? They got eroded. We've been in an inflationary period over time. And, over the last few years, we've seen a lot of inflation. And as Shannon mentioned earlier too, tariffs are causing prices to increase. And when I talk about pricing and, in front of groups, I always ask for a show of hands, and I say, whose payroll is the same now as it was 3 years ago, or lower? And almost nobody raises their hands, right? I mean, everything is costing more. Even if you're in a service-based business, if you're in a raw material goods business, you really have seen it. So you got to adjust your pricing as time goes on, and without scaring off your customers. So how do you do that? So if you go to the next slide, I'll talk about, this is a tool that we use, and we use it with our clients too. We use it in workshop type of situations where we're thinking about our customers. So on this simple 2x2 grid, and those of you who know me know I appreciate a good 2x2 grid. What we see here on the x-axis is difficulty. And I know this is going to come as a big shock, but not all customers are as easy to work with as others. And so if you look on the left side of that is what we're talking about there is how easy is that customer to work with. So on the left, they're easy to work with. They're enjoyable. They don't burn your team out. On the right side they are difficult. They complain about their pricing. They don't pay on time. They, burn your team out, that kind of thing. And then if you look on the y-axis, that's profitability. How much money do you make off them? Are they highly profitable, or you lose money on them, or is there something in the middle? And there's a gradation here within each one of these blocks. But that upper right is demanding. They're tough customers. They're going to make you earn it, but they're worth it. They're going to challenge you. They're going to push you. Sometimes you're going to want to fire them, but at the end of the day, you're making good money off of them. And those are my favorite kind of customers, actually. I like those kind of customers. But then you go over to the other side where they're super profitable and they're easy to work with. Your staff loves working with them. They come home, they come back after a meeting. They're like, those guys are great. We love them. They're appreciative. They pay their bills on time. Good people. And that's also maybe a unicorn there too. So, and then you get the charity customers where you look at and you're like, hey, they're great people. We love working with them, but we just don't make any money with them. And that charity is not necessarily a nonprofit, right? You can be working with a really lucrative company, but somehow they have, negotiated a good price with you and they're funding you and you don't mind it as much. But and then over to the right, those are the clients from hell. Those are the ones that absolutely crush you. And you don't like working with them. Your team doesn't like working with them. And what we recommend in this situation is we'll go and we'll have our clients, or when we do it ourselves, we'll plot our clients onto this chart. And we look at it and you'll see that a lot of, there's not always consensus, right? Some person's client from heaven is another person's demanding customer. And a demanding customer can be a client from hell to different people, right? And so what do you want to do if they're in that client from hell thing is you want to get them up. So you got to go up on their pricing. You have to, if it's going to make sense for your organization. And if you can't get them up there, then send them down the road and let them make your competitors' life miserable, and because you cannot sit there and not make decent margins on things, because as Shannon was talking about earlier, it's detrimental to your business. If your margins are too low, you can't invest in your people. You can't invest in new technology. You can't invest in good marketing and good customer research and things that are going to improve your business. And so you're just going to be in that on the verge of bankruptcy and kind of limping along. And so you got to make those tough decisions to get those up, get that up. And the charity customers, they're fine. It's okay we have customers like that we don't make a lot of money on, but we like them and we appreciate their mission. But we go into it eyes wide open, knowing this is going to be, we're going to take we're not going to make a bunch of money off this customer, but they're in an industry we like and we want to be in, we want to get experience in, or they just, they have a good mission and we want them to be successful. And so that's kind of where you have to go. But look at it, run it by your team, and everybody get on the same page with it, with where you want to go with it. So the other place that we see as a profitability leakage point is when customers launch new offerings. So at Bluebird, we help clients commercialize offerings a lot, and we work with big companies and mid-sized companies, and but most of our clients are technical companies. So in life sciences, oil and gas, SaaS type companies, and they make their living by launching new offerings. And when you launch a new offering, it's a good opportunity to raise your prices for that new thing that comes out for your existing customers and for new customers too, and a way to attract new customers. And you have to make sure that you capture the value upon launch, though, because that's the time when you have the greatest ability to get pricing power. If it's something new, something differentiated, something that no one else has, now's your point. If you price it too low, it's very difficult to raise prices once something is in the market. You can always discount it, but it's very hard to raise prices once it's in the market because it's established as a cost in the mind, and there becomes a new benchmark. And as David, pointed out, pricing and value are not the same thing. So what you've got to do is, understand what does that customer really value. And if you don't have great research like David can provide, what you have to do is there's other ways you can do it too. And one of the techniques we use for our clients is conjoint analysis. And it's a really interesting approach because you go and you ask the customer, what of these new features do you value? And really smart companies will do conjoint analysis before they begin their engineering, because it costs a lot of money to engineer things and a lot of time and a lot of wasted effort. And if you're engineering something because you think it's great, or you think the customers might value it, or even if the customer said they value it, you might not know, they may not really pay you off for that in the real market. And so, one of our clients told me, he said, Richard, when you're in product development and you ask customers if they want features, that it's like going into a room full of kids and asking if they want ice cream. Every hand's going to go up and say, yes, give me ice cream. But when you say, are you willing to clean your room before you get your ice cream, you're going to see a certain percentage of the hands go down. And it's like that with customers. Like, do you want this feature? Yes. Are you willing to pay me a premium for that feature? Maybe not. Maybe so. But how do you know? And so conjoint analysis does a good job of looking at all the different features and benefits of a technology, floating it out there and saying, yeah, these are the ones that customers see value in. These features they're neutral on, and these features they're never going to pay you back for. And if you can combine this feature and that feature, then you really got something special. But don't engineer these other things or talk about it to the customers, because they really don't care. So that is a really important one. And then once you have understood that, you've got to be able to understand how your competitors are pricing their offerings and how your offering differentiates from that. And you got to be able to talk to them about it and clearly communicate that to those customers when you take something to the market, and communicate that differentiation, and make sure your salespeople can talk about it. I think salespeople sometimes, like Shannon said, they can be very market driven. And, I'm not beating up on salespeople. So you guys know, I'm our only salesperson here at Bluebird. And, I think, you hear a lot of that's too expensive, and you feel like you lose on price more than you really do a lot of times. And so salespeople will push back on pricing a lot when we do our pricing workshops with our clients. And you just have to be brave and say, yeah, that's great, but we're going off what the customer told us, not what the customer told you, because they're always going to beat you up on price. And then I guess once you start high with that pricing, you can always make concessions, but do it with eyes wide open. So do have that model, that cost plus model in the background to say, we will reduce our certain thing, but we can't reduce below this margin ever. And so we're not going to. So the next thing, I guess the next leakage point we see is in negotiating new deals. And our advice to our customers is, don't hate yourself in the morning after you make a deal. Whenever, and you see a lot with salespeople, they're like, man, if we could just get that price down 5%, I know we could win it. I really feel like we can do it. And, the customer told me that the bad guys are, coming in lower than us, and they're beating us up on this. And so all those things, and CEOs and salespeople are the biggest ones, the biggest offenders of saying, you know what, let's just do it. Let's lower it to win this deal. But you just really need to go into it eyes wide open and not hate yourself the next day or 6 months down the road. And, my team is really good about doing that with me, because I'm the biggest offender here. I'm like, let's win it. I love to win. And, luckily, Shannon is there to say, yeah, but if we win that, we're just going to be working our tails off with all these other things. And, we might make here's what our profitability would look like on. And so one of the things that you can do in negotiating deals, because sometimes your customers are being price driven. We see the market tightening right now across multiple industries. And, what we recommend to our clients when they're trying to get deals across the line is they say, look, this is really no joking. This is our budget, and we can't go above that. Well, that's a time to concede on scope, but not on price. And you see it in the grocery stores. They call it shrinkflation. That's an industry that runs on very, very, very tight margins in both consumer packaged goods and in the grocery store. And they can't just give you a huge discount without losing money on things. So what do? You buy your bag of potato chips and they still cost $5 or whatever, but there's 30% less chips in the bag. Well, think about that from how do you translate that over to a professional services or a software company or some of these other kind of companies that are not, big, heavy capital intense type projects. You can't do shrinkflation with a subsea tree. But you can do it with professional services. You say, look, well, let's pull back our scope on this thing and ask the customer, in that negotiation, what are these things, this is what we thought we should provide for you based on what you told us your needs were and what your challenges were. Which one of these things would you like to take off? And put it in their court, and have them start walking with you. And if they say, look, it's all about price and you got to hit my price or we walk, well, maybe that you're talking to a customer from hell. And if you look at it and you go, well, look, we don't have 50% margins to give away on this thing. We can't come down 50% on our price, and you're not willing to, reduce the scope 50%, then you can feel confident in walking away from a deal like that. But the big one is make sure that your salespeople are prepared to have those conversations. We work with a lot of salespeople that really if they don't feel comfortable having those pricing conversations, they'll cave and they just retreat on price every time. And that can just absolutely crush you as a company if you just give away all your marketing before you even start the deal. So make sure that they're talking to the right people in the organization and they can justify your value. So like they said, price is one thing, value is the other. So if you're solving a $100 million problem, but you're 5% more than the competitor, you should never lose a deal like that. But if your salespeople aren't prepared to have those conversations, you will lose those deals with certain customers. So arm them with scripts, arm them with sales enablement tools that they can use to calculate ROI or calculate, lifetime value or whatever it is that's going to help them to tell their story to the customer. So that's what I got, Jackie.
So my biggest question that I have for you is, how do we assess market demand for new products before they launch?
Market demand before they launch. Well, so that's a good question. So I think if you're talking about demand, or are you talking about pricing? Because I think there's two different things. So, before you launch, I think, if you're looking at how you're going to price it before you launch, that's where I think that the conjoint analysis tool can really work. Or if you can leverage a voice of customer research that's out there, like David does, that's a great time to look out there and go, look, we've used David's data in the past and we've looked at it and we go, there's a huge gap in the market here in this price point, or no one loves anybody in this price point or in this market. Nobody's in that upper right-hand corner. And so looking at that kind of data and saying, let's go. There's a gap in the market. There's a white space there. Let's go occupy it and own that space.
Richard, how many times have you heard, build it and they will come? We lived through those Enron days, right? And so I can't tell you how many times, Jackie and Richard, that, well-intended, thought out products, services, and technologies were very well developed and placed into the market. They only find that their actual demand wasn't as large as they had envisioned. And, one of the things that's very resourceful in the oil field is, how operators are extremely resourceful in trying to figure out the most efficient way to get the job done. And so even though you may have a great piece of technology, that the price value equation that Richard pointed out about doing the demand work and the pricing work up front, you don't identify that mismatch. And it happens quite often, more times than than folks care to admit to.
Mm-hmm. What would be the best way to communicate price increases to existing customers? Shannon, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think, there's a really delicate line with that. We've had those conversations internally quite a bit because, demand changes or, cost of living and inflation and all those things impact, how we work and how we live every day and how we support labor and things like that. And I think you really have to look back at the relationships that you have with your customers and understand the best way to communicate those. And there's rollout strategies for those things as well. And so I think, again, I go back to what I said earlier about transparency and having those relationships with your customers. And I think if you've been able to build that rapport with them over time in terms of delivery, then those conversations become a lot easier to have. And I think the other thing is thinking about the approach to, with certain customers versus new customers. You kind of have to weigh, is it do I raise those prices with current customers, or is that a strategy I use moving forward for new customers? And I think, again, there's not a one size fits all approach. So hopefully I'm kind of answering your question. But I think that you really have to think through some of those nuances as you're thinking through that strategy rollout.
Got it. Thank you for
My answer is very carefully.
No, it's a balance. It's a tightrope on that one. You got to be very careful.
And to build on what Shannon just said, Jackie, being honest and transparent is paramount. I mean, you take oilfield services, for example. Many oil companies, using the proper technologies and skilled personnel on site, can drill the lateral length of a well, say 10,000 feet, in a 24-hour period. And so if you were an oilfield service company working on a day rate and you're drilling 10,000 feet of lateral in a day rather than 3,000 feet of lateral in a day, you're translating a lot of value. You're saving 3 rig days of drilling time to the oil company now. And so, that opens up the door, to different pricing models that Shannon talked about. Maybe there's an opportunity for a performance-based contracting model in that particular case, right? We've actually seen clients just come completely clean, with their customers and say, look, we realize things are not going well, but, the cost to bring the most competently qualified personnel are going to require an additional, whatever, 5 or 10 or 15% in wages in order to recruit those additional personnel. And oftentimes the customers acknowledge it and go, we agree. So if you can get back to the standard of performance that we each mutually set out by bringing in better qualified personnel, we're all in, right? And so being able to identify and quantify the value and the implications to both the supplier and to the customer, and getting mutual transparent recognition is really helps makes those conversations go far more quickly.
Absolutely.
Who owns the conversation when it comes to pricing? We saw those pricing models. There's 3 different, examples that we were given. Who ultimately takes responsibility?
Who wants to tackle that one?
I'll ask you, do you mean internally or externally? Externally with the customer, or internally as the company?
Internally as the company, who is it that is going to say, or especially if you're thinking about leading this conversation in your organization, do you have the ability to raise your hand and speak up?
Yeah, well, I'll tee it off, and I'm sure everybody will have different thoughts on it. But one of the things that I think is it's a team sport. So, if you look at that cost plus model, if you're not doing that, you're going to be in big trouble, because you have to understand the math. All right. It just boils down to math at the end of the day, whether you're going to lose your shirt on the deal or not. Now, so if you don't have that baseline of what it's cost to deliver your product to the offering and serve that client at the rate that they want to be served, you're going to be in big trouble. So you have to know that. That's the baseline. And then you do want to get some input from the salespeople, not too much, because they, like I said, they're very price sensitive because they get beat up on price every day. They get told they lost on price when that really wasn't the case, because they didn't want to hurt their feelings, right? We're dealing with people here, and there's stuff like that happens all the time. And then, is there room in there? Do customers see it? Because I think one of the things that, when Sham's talking about value-based pricing, is true. There could be extra value there, but here's the flip side of it. You're talking about value-based pricing. It doesn't always mean you could charge more. Sometimes your customers don't value what you do in the least. And so you have to find, either at that case, you got to go find a new customer, or you've got to change your offering. You got to come back with something. Like David said, as industries mature and more entrants come in, and there's just going to be this price erosion, and so their perceived value, it goes lower. So if you can't get up above that, you have to listen to what they say, and either choose not to serve that market, or find a new way to add value. But if they don't value what you do, you can't charge more.
To build, Richard, on what you just said, and I love the team support part, and I really love know your numbers. And you mentioned it earlier, either Shannon or Jackie, about what's the value of 1%. And I don't care if it's 1% in pricing up or 1% in cost out. And Richard mentioned earlier about a subsea tree. What can you do for a subsea tree, for goodness sake? But if you take a look at F&C with 2.0 and One Subsea with Blue Box and Baker Hughes with Aptera, yes, you can easily reduce the cost of a subsea tree by 10 or 20% if you move to more of a standardized design than a customized design that requires all new qualifications and testing and stretches out the timelines and things like that. And so, there are solutions that can be put in place, as Richard mentioned. Do you adjust the scope, or do you adjust the pricing, or is there some moderation in between? And it does vary from industry to industry quite a bit, clearly, right? And so there's all types of tools in the toolbox. I know Richard, you and Shannon and Jackie and the Bluebird guys are really great at putting all these tools up on the table, for businesses to evaluate. You do have multiple tools. And the better you strategically step back, and I loved your customer matrix grid. That was beautiful. And it's so critical to be able to step back and to be able to strategically assess this. And so, great advice and great advice.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we are coming to the end of our show today, and I wanted to before we leave, I wanted to thank you all for joining us today and exploring pricing strategies. Before we leave, I want to ask if everyone has any parting words that they want to give the audience. And Shannon, I'll start with you.
Okay. Yes. Thank you again for having me. And this was, I always enjoy having these conversations amongst friends. And I would just say, to go back to what Richard just said, have these conversations internally. Don't be afraid to step out and ask questions and, challenge internally these things. I think sometimes we get a little afraid to challenge other people, and it doesn't mean that you're trying to be aggressive. It just means you're trying to do what's best for the business, and to, I think challenging our peers is very healthy. So there needs to be that perfect center of tension within your organization. So just be willing to have those conversations, and then be willing to have, to think through a strategy together, and willing to seek outside counsel on that as well. There's great partners like David and us who are willing to have those conversations. And so just be open to those things.
Awesome. Thank you. David?
Just to wrap up, price and value are not the same. Be able to identify and quantify the value that you bring, but be honest with yourself. Every supplier has inherent strengths and weaknesses, and not every customer is meant to be yours. So find your sweet spot. Be honest about your strengths and weaknesses. Be honest about your customers, the good ones and not so good ones. Find your sweet spot and deliver mutual value, and execute.
And Richard?
Yeah. Two main thoughts. Don't work for customers from hell. That's a recipe for burnout for your team. It's a recipe for, a lot of frustrations, feeling like you're working super hard, not making a lot of money. Where did all the money go at the end of the quarter when you report your earnings? I think that's where it goes a lot of times. And don't make deals that are going to make you hate yourself in the morning. I think that is such a, people are competitive and markets are competitive, and people will just chase the work. There are certain companies and that can get by with that, but most people can't. It's really difficult to be the low cost leader. We work with clients who have, big private equity back behind them, and they don't mind if they lose money for a couple of years even, because they're trying to get that market share. But if you don't have a big bank behind you and a bunch of investors behind you and all that, you're going to have to report to shareholders while you're losing money. You're going to have to report to bank account while you're losing money, and it's not a recipe for staying in business for very long. So go enter these deals with eyes wide open, know your numbers, and don't make bad deals if you can help it.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, so much for your insights on pricing strategies today. And thank you for joining us, to our audience. If you have any questions, please reach out to the Bluebird Strategic Sales and Marketing, and we will be happy to answer those questions. Take a listen to our podcast, Above the Clouds, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.